So we're trying to find God, and have come to the conclusion that if God exists, he should be the greatest conceivable being. We also realize that by searching for such a being, we have some issues we must confront. What will we do with a communication from God if we find it? If a communication exists, how do we verify it? Even after all this work and theory, we still haven't found the greatest conceivable being. So now I look out into the world and I witness all these religions, and each one is saying, "Come to us, we know God." Or another says, "Step over here, follow us." Still another says, "No, don't follow that religion, it's wrong." Is there some way we can narrow down this list of religions? Is there some way to determine which communication is correct, or at least eliminate some? Well, just like being in existence, humans also know something about communication. When we search for a being, we took what we know about being using logic and philosophy to narrow down the characteristics of a being to theorize about the greatest conceivable being. So maybe we can do a similar process with communication. So before we even examine a religion's communication in depth, we will attempt to narrow down our list of religious candidates using reason and logic. We will test supposed religious communications. We will filter the religions and any possible communications from God. Where do we start? Well, what is communication? At a fundamental level, we have to ask such a question. Basically, communication is a two-way street, a road, a link between two beings. We have this GCB and we have ourselves, and we need a connection. We need someone to start the conversation. Much of my consideration of communication between the GCB and a human I derive from a parent-child communication concept. If we have a being who's the GCB, it would be the first, eternal. Even if he sends lesser beings to create the universe, the greatest conceivable being is the prime mover, the first. He is the parent. How do parents communicate with children? Parents initiate communication. Children will never be the initiator of such communication. Infants are limited when born and have no effect upon meaningful communication. Many parents have spent many a night trying to interpret repetitive crying, unable to decipher such cryptic, feeble attempts at communication. Communication is not something we know at birth, and humans do not exhibit reliable a priori knowledge. Humans learn, we gather, we develop. Even when an infant learns to speak, when children are old enough to ask, "Why am I here? Who are my parents?" If the parent is not around to answer such a question, we as children remain ignorant. We as children are dependent upon those who came before us. We must obtain communication from them. Humans have this long line of human history going back thousands or even millions of years before us that prompt us to ask, how did we get here? Why are we here? We desire answers to fundamental questions of existence on a personal and a species level. On a personal level, other humans can provide answers that might satisfy. However, on a species level, the GCB must provide those answers, a being who comes before the human species. Why do I associate parent-child communication with the GCB? Communication is not only a two-way street to obtain information, communication also involves relationship and trust. I cannot communicate with someone without a relationship. In addition, any communication about events unwitnessed by myself or before my existence requires me to trust my communication partner. If a religion states that a being was resurrected, I have to trust people I do not personally know. Communication is not just words on a page or a sound in my ear. Communication is regarding the very history of this world and universe. Therefore, communication is two beings in a relationship sharing information and trust. For a communication relationship between a parent and a child, or GCB and human, the parent or GCB, the one who exists first, must initiate the communication. How does this help find communication from God? Probably not much, but it does eliminate any religion that theorizes about God. Basically, the religion or person must claim that, quote, God said, or, quote, God spoke to me. The main point is that we must recognize that the GCB initiates communication. Even if we cry out like a baby, the parent can walk away, not listen, or disappear into utter silence. Okay, Colon, that seems pretty obvious, sure. But so does the statement either God exists or God does not exist. So what? So here's the point of step 6. The GCB must confirm and say, yes, I am God. I am the greatest conceivable being, and you are talking with me. So just like our first point regarding being, in which either God exists or God does not exist, therefore, either the greatest conceivable being speaks with humans, or the GCB does not speak with humans. If the GCB initiates communication or confirms communication, then communication happens. It occurs. And since humans possess alleged communications from God that we can examine directly, which we will, any communication from God should have certain characteristics based on his identity. For example, if the GCB exists and possesses all knowledge, once he speaks, God would know the ultimate impact of said communication with every human. So, how would God communicate? Well, first let me ask you, how do you communicate with other humans? Your children, your spouse, really anyone? Well, you might use words produced by a physical body. You might use body language, like hand gestures. You could write your communication. But can you use telepathy? Can you speak directly into someone's mind? No, of course not. Though some may want to argue. Telepathy, echolocation, and pheromone signaling are not innate abilities that humans possess. Therefore, communication is derived from the ability or characteristics a being possesses. Communication arises from our being, our nature. So too for God, the greatest conceivable being. Any such communication from God would arise from his nature. Underlying how God would communicate is why would God communicate. Behind every how is the why. No matter how God communicates, we need to consider why is God communicating. The first characteristic of communication is purpose. God is going to have a purpose for communication, just like any human form of communication. This is vitally important. Do you agree that if communication from the greatest conceivable being exists, the GCB must either initiate communication with humans or must confirm communication with humans? Second, if communication exists, will it have an identity and a purpose? Either the GCB speaks with humans or the greatest conceivable being does not speak with humans. Therefore, we'll examine communications from beings who should claim to be the greatest conceivable being, displaying characteristics of his nature that then forms an identity of the speaker. As an all-powerful being, could communication from God exhibit what we would consider miracles? Could communication be in dreams? An animal speaking? Voices from something invisible or immaterial? There are so many possibilities. Which door do we open? Humans have literally obtained various books. Communication already exists. We just have to determine who is speaking. Who is the author? Communication from God will have an identity. Communication from God will be a manifestation of His being as the greatest conceivable being. Just as each human has a personality, a being which derives from how he or she communicates, any communication from the greatest conceivable being derives from God's nature, which will be displayed through His communication as an identity. What is God's communication identity? How will God communicate? And what is the GCB's purpose? What are the take-home points? Either the greatest conceivable being speaks with humans, or the GCB does not speak with humans. God must initiate or confirm communication with humans. Any communication from God will have a purpose. Any communication from God develops a relationship. Finally, any communication from God will have an identity based upon His nature.